for joining us for session 4 of the Transformation Brutal Truth series. For those who haven't met me yet, I'm Ben, and I'm a member of the team here at Hivemind and your host for the series as we're getting underneath the surface of why transformation so often fails and what we can do about it. So over the last 3 sessions, we've explored the scale of change organizations are facing, why some of the traditional approaches just aren't working anymore, and some of the biggest blockers to real change. Now, before we get started, as always, just a quick bit of housekeeping to go through. So we've got roughly 30 minutes together today for conversation and presentation, and we'll invite your participation and engagement as always. We've got a couple of polls planned to get your views and experience, and we'd also love for you to be able to share any questions that you have on the content we're going to go through. If you can do that in the chat, we'll do our best to pick all of those up for the Q&A session at the end. So with that bit out of the way, we can dive into today's topic. So today we're going to be talking about something that is rarely considered in transformation strategy and planning, but it has a massive impact on the lasting success of change and transformation programs. So we're going to be talking about the shadow organization, the invisible forces and unspoken culture that lives underneath the formal structures and org charts in your organizations. I absolutely love the name shadow organization, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this topic this morning. And as you can see on screen, I've got Indra Books with me this morning to get through to share some insight on this. Indra's a transformation leadership expert. She's worked in over 40 countries, and she was just impressing me this morning before we got on live with how many different languages she can speak. She's best known not for the number of languages that she can talk, but for turning fractured teams into high-performing powerhouses and helping organizations align culture and strategy in really lasting ways. So Indra brings deep expertise, a really sharp mind, a ton of energy, and she's actually really fun to work with. So I'm delighted to have her on the line this morning, and she's going to help us see, understand, and work with the shadow organization. So with that said, Indra, let's get into the topic and hear more about your brutal truth and why it's so critical to transformation success.
All right, well, with that introduction, I better say something impressive today. But we are going to actually talk about the shadow organization. And Ben, you were mentioning, what's lurking under the surface with transformations. And the shadow organization is definitely a lurker, if you will, and something that we cannot ignore. So I think we all know that organizations have 2 layers. We have that visible layer of things that we know about, the org chart, the people and their relationships. But there's always that layer underneath that's invisible. And let me give you an example. So I am known for telling stories. So I actually have this whole talk planned out, because if not, I will tell stories for the next 3 hours and nobody's going to get much. So I'm going to try to stay on point. But I wanted to tell a story to illustrate this idea of a shadow organization. Years ago, when I was in the public sector, the public sector is very big on gossip, by the way, which is probably why this story unfolded. And gossip is part of your shadow organization, if you're not aware of that.
Absolutely.
But I would have flowers in my office on a regular basis. So the rumor around the office was I must be dating someone who has a whole lot of money to be constantly buying me flowers and putting them in my office. And of course, then there was the speculation, who was this person and what was going on? And finally, one day, a colleague said to me, how do you get him to buy you all these flowers?
I kind of want to know.
And I said, who? The janitorial staff? And the person just kind of looked at me like they didn't know what to say next. And I said, the staff is putting these in my office. Why? What do you guys think? Of course, pretending I didn't hear the gossip. So what actually was happening was every time there was a diplomatic event, they would throw away everything that was left over.
Yeah, okay.
Staff was allowed to take what they wanted. So if there was leftover food, they were allowed to take it home, or if there was leftover, flowers or whatever. And so they would always put an arrangement of flowers in my office. So every 2 weeks, there would be new flowers in my office. And nobody could figure out why I got the flowers and nobody else got the flowers. And I said, well, it's really simple, because I don't think these people are invisible.
Mm-hmm.
I see them. I
Yeah.
say hello. I say good morning. How was your weekend? Did your son win at his game? Whatever it happened to be. And as a result, because I saw them as people who were an integral part of our structure, I had flowers in my office every 2 weeks.
Fascinating.
And that is a positive example of the shadow organization. So I think as leaders, we need to really remember you can't change what you can't see.
100%.
So if you are not aware of what's happening, those things that are lurking can very quickly become quite toxic. Okay. So another example of how it can become toxic, before I go on to the next slide. I was in a performance review, and we all have our opinions about those. I'm sure we could do a whole separate session on that. And I was in a performance review. I was a director at the time, and it was the CEO and the CIO. And the CIO said, Indra, we don't really know how you do what you do. And I said, I don't understand. What's the question? What do you mean? And he's like, well, no, I was just making a comment. We don't really understand what's happening over there in your department. And I said, okay, well, do you need me to explain? And it kept unraveling, and we were getting, it was getting worse and worse by the minute. And then he said, well, I don't know, you have some voodoo magic. And I was like, voodoo? I really
It's a strange thing to say in a performance review.
Yeah, we're in a performance review, and suddenly I've got like voodoo, and I don't know, I have little pins and dolls. I don't know what they thought I was doing over there. But the point was, they couldn't understand how I wasn't leading the way they would have led. But my teams were super, super successful. And we were bringing in millions and millions and millions of contracts. Every time we do work for one client, another client would want the same work. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't understand that what we were doing was working because it wasn't the way that they thought. And instead of approaching me with curiosity, they approached me with accusation. And when we are not curious about why people are different and we're accusatory, we know what happens. That sub-layer gets deeper and deeper and deeper, right?
Defenses come up.
Because we weren't going to change what we were doing. It was working. But we sure weren't going to participate in the culture that wasn't working.
For sure.
And so that's the toxic side. The flowers are the happy side. And the people hiding things because it's not safe to let them out in the open is the toxic side of it.
And so today we're going to talk about how to get more flowers, right?
We're going to talk about how to get more flowers and not be the Titanic running into the iceberg. So if you think of it like an iceberg, the things that are above the surface, those are things that everybody can see. We all know there's an org chart, and there's rules, and there's policies, and there's ways of doing things that are openly talked about. It's the stuff that's under that surface, the unwritten rules, the informal networks, the trusted people that maybe aren't even on the org chart, like the janitorial staff.
Yeah.
And that's where the influence is. Nobody has ever said our organization is highly influential because we have a great org chart.
No, for sure.
Nobody has ever been uber successful because they have an amazing handbook on how the company should run. It's those things that are underneath the surface that make or break the organization. All right, I think that means, Ben, we're at poll time.
Perfect. So for everybody on the call with us this morning, we'd love to hear your thoughts or experience on which of these has the biggest impact on whether change sticks and lasts in your organization? Is it the exec leadership, project and program leaders, informal influencers, or cultural leaders? Or there's no one really showing up consistently in your organization? And we'll give you another 10, 15 seconds, 20 seconds or so to find the poll. Hopefully you can see it easily enough on screen where the chat bar was. And
apparently our project and program managers aren't very influential.
It doesn't look like it. I'm not sure how many program leaders we have on the call with us. Maybe those guys and girls could represent their corner.
Yeah, exactly.
So an interesting
almost equal split.
Yeah, interesting, almost equal split. And I think that it really leans into and shows us that it's not, as you were saying, Indra, the formal structure that really tells the whole story of what drives an organization and where it moves. It'd be I think really interesting if we can getting into what your views are on some of the differences between formal structures and some of those informal shadow organizations.
So we're gonna go into that next. I will say that poll results, as we know, are always heavily influenced by the background of the person answering the question. So we have 8 people that said executive leadership has the most influence. That could mean they're super healthy organizations or they're leading by fear. We don't know the answer to that. Same thing with the informal. So, this question is probably just as, we're not going to get any scientific research money for it. But it is interesting to see who people think influences. But let's talk about the differences. So if we look at the formal side, I've already alluded to this, the roles, the hierarchy, the policy, the plans, job descriptions, titles, who has the right to decide what, who has the most power or influence at the table, whether it's the board of directors or it's the C-suite level or even middle management, who's making those decisions?
Our program directors as well.
And our program directors are in that. And I would challenge, and like you said, we don't know who's on the call today, but I would challenge that in most organizations, that middle level, those program directors and those program and project managers have quite a lot of influence on what happens or doesn't happen when it comes to what's being delivered. And we've all seen it. We've all seen the project manager that leads by the project chart, and everybody is, hates that approach. And we see the program director who's constantly moving all the obstacles and hurdles out of the way, and things are getting done. So we don't want to discount them just because they were not represented today. But on the shadow side of it, we've got the more, we talk about hard skills and soft skills. Well, here it's formal and informal. It's trust, influence, grapevines, tones, reputation, loyalty, emotional permission. And I had someone say to me last week when they heard what I was talking about, "Oh, Indra, you can't talk about that." And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, you can't, people you're going to get on that call and you're going to talk about all the negative things and all the conspiracies and how there's, all the, under shadow things lurking." And I said, you don't work in a very healthy environment, do you? A shadow organization, it does not imply that we have conspiracies and everybody's working against, the man, if you will, to do bad things. It just means that in every society, there's always the formal structure and the informal structure. And there's a place and a time for both of those. If we think of a country, rules and laws are supposed to keep us safe and, able to function in society. But we all know that if you got to get something done, there's a way to get it done. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what's written on the government website. And so, we just have to remember that this is not about conspiracies. It's not about, everything being, terrible and negative. But let's talk about this in a bit more detail. So if we look at 3 parts of shadow behaviors, there's informal power and influence. My favorite is the meeting after the meeting.
I love that.
And you're in trouble if there's a meeting before the meeting. and then the meeting, and then the meeting after the meeting. That either symbolizes we've got terrible dysfunction and decision-making skills, or decisions are not being made when they're on the official record.
Yeah.
And it could be either one. Your informal influencers we've talked about, but then you've also got people that could potentially be gatekeeping information and choosing who gets to hear what. And you need to watch that, because when people start gatekeeping information, that can go sideways pretty quickly. Then you have emotional resistance. You know, people sit in the room and they nod. And then they go do what they want. Mediterranean cultures are very notorious for this.
Yeah.
They will agree with you and then they will just go do what they want. You know, it's more like a thanks for sharing, but now I'm going to go do what I want to do. Emotional undercurrents in the room, like, you know, we've all been there. We're like, oh, I don't know what's going on in here, but there's something churning under the surface, or unspoken tensions. So those things we have to be careful about. And then cultural rituals, the unwritten rules. You know, I've been to many onboarding when HR gives you all the papers to fill out, and then you walk out the room and somebody says, but if you really need something, go to John down the hall. He knows how to get that.
Yes, yeah.
We've all been there, right? But if you really need your computer today, go talk to the guy over in the corner, because he's the one, he's going to get it done. Cultural rituals, we need to be careful about the ones that preserve the past. We've always done it this way is the end to any transformation.
Absolutely.
And then also hero culture. And a lot of people don't recognize that this is actually a negative, not a positive. When we start lauding praise over that one person or that one team and not recognizing that there's a whole company, we've put a whole lot of power in that one group. And we want to be really careful with that.
Or taking away a lot of power from the wider group.
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes one of these, oh, we'll just have them do it because they always get it done. Okay. Yeah. Now they're overworked, they're unhappy, there's all kinds of stuff going over there. They're not thrilled that they've been made the superheroes. And everybody else is like, well, why do they always get the accolades? Why do they always get the extras? Why do they always get the things? So you have to be careful. I'm not saying don't praise people when praise is due, because that's absolutely essential, but we have to be really careful. So on that note, now that we've mentioned all those.
Yeah. Perfect time for the poll. So Indra's talked us through some of the shadow behaviors. You'll see the poll coming up on your screen, hopefully any second. And what we're interested to know, if you're seeing these things or have seen these things in past organizations, what's the ones that resonate most for you? What's the most common shadow behavior, either in your current organization or organizations you've been involved with through your career? I love the meeting after the meeting and can hold my hand up and say over the years I've attended some of those. Silent agreement, hidden resistance. I think it was Sarah in the chat who, when you were talking about the Mediterranean cultures, also mentioned the Japanese culture. Unwritten rules overriding policy. I've seen that more times than I care to remember. Informal influence, shaping decisions, and avoiding difficult or taboo topics. That's a very British final option at the end there. I'm not surprised that we're seeing that as the early front runner.
Yeah. Well, let's give people a couple more seconds, and I'll tell a story about some of these difficult and taboo topics and unwritten rules. So many moons ago, I was working for the late General Colin Powell. And when he joined the civil service, he said, guys, I don't know what's going on here, but this infrastructure is an absolute mess. And I want everything sorted out in 18 months. We got him to be more specific about what everything and sorted out meant. But he said, I want this done in 18 months. We cannot be lagging so far behind as one of the premier agencies in the world. And I was super excited about it because I had in my head, being in charge of, operations for Europe and Eurasia, I had a plan. I knew what I needed to do to get this done. And apparently I was a bit too enthusiastic in the meeting. When you are the only woman in the space, you already have a spotlight on you.
For sure.
But then to agree with the big boss, publicly, I had apparently crossed a line. So when we left the room, all my colleagues were like, what in the heck is wrong with you? I cannot believe you actually agreed with him in the meeting. Now it's on record that you agreed. And by that implies we all agreed. And we didn't all agree because this isn't how we do things. And he needs to learn that this isn't the military. And we don't just get told what to do and go do it like little soldiers. And we're going to have to slow roll this now to show him this is not how it's done.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go back to my office now and I'm going to start getting things done because I don't want to be a part of this subculture to the subculture that's going on over here. And it was really, really, I mean, I knew that these things happen, but to sit there and tell me in the middle of the hallway that no, we don't get things done like this. This is the government and we don't move at that speed. And he can just get over himself, to me was very shocking. So let's see. Oh yeah, we've got a lot of people avoiding those difficult or taboo topics in our poll, don't we?
Yeah, that's the most popular. Just the meeting after the meeting, so it's not just me sitting in there on my own. That's good.
No. And the silent agreement, the hidden resistance, that's another one. All right, let's dig into this and see how we can change some of these things before we run out of time and have 400 questions we haven't answered.
Perfect.
What does this look like when it's blocking change and when it's driving change? So informal influence, for example, I'm not going to read all of these because you're all intelligent people and can read, but informal influence, respected managers or respected anybody, they're quietly resisting the change. I mean, this group that attacked me in the hallway was a bit more vocal about it, but had I not been so enthusiastic to do this project, they would have quietly resisted it.
Yeah, they would have whispered instead.
But what drives change when you have that informal influence is when you know who your champions are and you rally them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talk about, we need the champions, or we need the win team, or, whatever. You need to know who those people are in your organization that you can go to when you need allies.
Yeah.
Okay. And workarounds, when you put a new process in place and nobody agrees with it and they just go around it and they just keep going back to the old way or a different way of doing it, that means you're never going to change. But if when you as a leader see a workaround happening, you need to recognize that means that this isn't working. That's why we're working around it. That's what the word means.
Yeah.
And we need to evolve that workaround into a new experiment or prototype of how we could do things.
I love that. So
and
we can
recognize it and lean into it instead of going, we said no. All right. Why does this matter? You can have all the great plans in the world. You can have presented anything you want to the board of directors and said, we're going to change this. We're going to increase our market shares. We're going to rewrite policy. We're going to restructure the company. We're going to introduce new technology. Pick a topic. But if you don't have everybody on board, if the organization is not culturally ready, you're just talking. You're not doing. And you're never going to get there. You're going to be what we call frozen in the middle.
Yeah.
We're going to get frozen right in the middle. And then we're going to be like the Titanic running into the iceberg. And we know what happened there. It didn't end well.
Yeah. Sure.
So if you acknowledge that structures are important and necessary, but culture is as important and as impactful, then you are halfway to addressing the problem. But if you always take the approach of, well, the change committee came up with this, or the executive committee came up with that, and this is what we're doing, and you don't recognize what's happening around you, you're going to spend a lot of money and have a lot of frustration and not get where you want to be.
Yeah.
So I tell people all the time, you have to map it out. And I don't mean have another brainstorming where we've got 75 whiteboards and whatever. I'm not talking about, documenting the heck out of it. Now you've got a documented culture, right? But you need to understand it. You need to map it out informally and understand what's happening. You need to know, who do people really go to when they need help, or they're confused, or they don't understand something. I used to be the go-to person when I was in Washington, D.C. for all matters health insurance. Did I work in HR? No. Did I work for the insurance company? No. Was I the benefits manager? Oh, please no. Okay. I was the director of transformation, but why did people come to me? Because I had a major health issue, which meant I had used all the aspects of all of our plans and programs.
Okay.
And I knew what to do and what not to do when you needed a claim filed or you needed help with something. So you have to understand who are the go-to people. Okay.
Yeah.
And you need to look at what are the invisible rules that are happening? Like, what's that system that's working? And who's shaping the tone in the room? If you only ever have one or two people in a meeting speaking up, take note of that. It might be because Susan is just a chatterbox and she likes to talk, and you've not given anybody else space to talk because you let her talk. Or it could be that nobody else wants to say anything.
Yeah.
Or feels that they can say something. So you have to, we say read the room. You have to read the room. So if we go back to that tech conversation where I got maligned in the hallway for being too enthusiastic and wanting to do my job, I went back to my team and said, okay, we have 86 cities, my friends, and we have 18 months. How are we going to make this happen? And they started with the strategy. I said, the first thing we're going to do is in each location, we're going to figure out is who is the person?
Yeah.
Who is our go-to person? We need to know that. We need to know who the person is that in a crisis is the one that's solving the problems, clearing the obstacles. We need to know who that person is that's going to make people feel comfortable, because we have a whole lot of non-technical people that have to go through a technical change.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be scared, and they're going to be nervous, and they might even be angry. So we need to know who are our advocates, who are our allies, get them all together, and leverage that power.
In some kind of way, that's like formalizing some of those informal structures, and or at least tapping into those
Into them. Yeah.
Those informal structures.
Tapping into them, absolutely. All right, sensitive of time. This is restating what we've always said. Invite these people into the conversation. If you've got a problem with how the building is operating, invite that janitorial staff that was bringing the flowers to my office, invite them into the conversation, because they know how to solve these problems. Align with what's happening, not just your process, but your culture and your people. Create community. And then that's going to drive momentum. Because if people feel valued and heard, then that change, it's still going to be scary. It's still going to have its bumps in the road, but they are going to be less likely to put up a giant speed bump.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really similar to an approach we took in a really large multi-country technology transformation program. One of our change practitioners in there built out something that he called the influencer network, and it was exactly as you talked about, finding those really trusted folks in all the different locations, and building around them the momentum to land the change.
Yeah. So there's a series of cookbooks that says, instead of eating this, eat that. So instead of trying this, instead of doing this, try this. Instead of forcing things on people, instead of calling out, oh, I guess Susan has something to say again. Instead of making an example of people, instead of, hero worship or ignoring the emotions in the room, try a different approach. Create community. Surface the blockers with curiosity. Remember the bosses that said, we don't know how you do, and then somehow there was voodoo magic involved? If they had just approached me with curiosity, and said, we don't know how you do, but can you share with us? Can you explain it? Can you show us what you're doing? Because we're super curious at how this is working so well.
Try and understand it.
Yeah, but instead, they made me go into the dark corners and hide. And what I ended up doing was putting a bubble around my teams to protect them. Because these same two people would go to them and say, what is she doing?
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? You know, and be very accusatory. So instead, I essentially made my own entity in the company and kept everybody boxed off. And we just kept making money. And they certainly weren't going to fire me for not being a team corporate player with the amount of money that we were bringing in.
But if they'd approached you with that curiosity and they'd have been able to leverage more of what you were doing that was working so well in other parts of the organization.
Yeah. So what's some takeaways, and then we're going to get to questions in about 3 minutes over. We talked about mapping your informal influencers. That is something you can do this afternoon. Okay, it's Friday afternoon. I'm in Spain. Maybe not. Maybe on Monday morning when you're fresh. You know, map your informal flow influencers. You know, who are those people? Just make a list.
And people will know immediately in the top of their heads the half a dozen already.
If you don't know those people, you need to be having a different conversation, and these 3 quick tips are not going to be where you're going to start. But we should, like you said, we should each be able to come up with a handful of people. The next thing is the next time you're in a meeting, which for some of you will probably be this afternoon, I'm sorry. What are the undertones? What are the feelings in the room? Who's speaking up and who's not speaking up? Who's contributing and who's not? I did a whole series on meetings. I can do a whole nother topic on why we should not be having all the meetings we're having. But if we are going to insist on having them, then we need to make them a place where it's safe for people to participate and contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's no need for them to contribute, then why are we having the meeting? But look at the undertones and just really pay attention the next time you're in a meeting to the dynamics of that meeting. Why are you having it? How are people reacting to what's being shared in the meeting? How are they participating? And what are the outcomes of that meeting? And then are we having a meeting after the meeting? You know, what's happening in the Slack channel after the meeting?
Yeah.
Because, you know, we don't have the water cooler anymore, right? And then the last one is find one ritual that's happening in your company and rethink how you use that.
Okay.
So I talked about meetings, maybe how you introduce policy or procedure. Maybe think about, okay, every Friday we send out an email to remind people to do A, B, and C. Okay, think about that. Maybe nobody's even reading that email anymore because you keep reminding them to do A, B, and C, and they don't really care about A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And they're doing their timesheets. Don't know why we still have timesheets, but they're doing them. Think about those things that you do on a regular basis and what can you change? Can you drop a meeting? Can you make a commitment to reduce meetings by 25% in the next quarter? Can you change how you communicate with people? Can you come up with new ways for people to participate in the conversation without feeling put on the spot? Just little things. Just pick one little thing that next week you're going to change about what you do and how you lead. And that's all going to help build that community for better conversations when you need to make a big change.
Great tips.
Right. If you want to lead transformation, lead the shadow too. That's my final thought.
I love it. Thanks for thanks for all that, Indra. Some really great insights. I'd love to hear from our audience on if you can pop that last slide back up. Just go back up one. On these takeaway actions, if those are if they resonate based on what Indra shared, and if they're things that you would you're going to look to do, perhaps not this afternoon,
maybe wait till Monday,
in next week or over the summer, and also now's a great time to drop any questions you have on the content we've covered in the chat, and Indra and I can pick them up. There's one that came through already from Tara, and Tara's asked, engaging the informal influencer network directly can sometimes make the formal management structures nervous or suspicious. Have you got any tips for how to manage that?
Yes, and that is to me a symptom of a very unhealthy organization, because you've already accelerated yourself to a level of, in the hierarchy. You're already at the top. So if you're feeling very suspicious or nervous about people talking, we need to ask ourselves why. But I think the best thing to do is to, lead by example and show people what it looks like to be curious. So your leaders should be curious about other people and about what's going on. And if they exhibit that curiosity to learn what's happening, it's not an us versus them anymore.
Yeah.
It's we as leaders don't have all the answers, and we want to learn from you. We're curious. Why does that make sense to you? Just like when they didn't ask me, show us how this works. We're curious. So you can't go straight from suspicious and concerned that people are talking behind your back straight to curiosity. But leaders that are experiencing that says a whole lot more about them than it does the organization. And why are they feeling so insecure and so nervous that people are having conversations? And that would be a group I would want to get into some leadership coaching, some executive coaching on working about who they are as leaders, how they're showing up, and what side of themselves the rest of the organization is seeing.
You touched on something in there as well, Indra, about it showing the proofs in the pudding, right? So showing some results. If engaging in an influencer network in a more substantial way is making them nervous because they're seeing a potential large change across the organization or across the culture, can you demonstrate by making a small change and show the impact and the value of that to reduce the nerves or reduce the suspicion and bring them on the journey if you can?
Yeah. Well, I think that ties in. Sarah's asking about public sector and civil servants. Oh, that's my soft spot. So one of the things that, I have done agile transformations in public service where people said this cannot be done. We don't work in an agile way. This isn't the culture. This isn't, and much like me just telling Colin Powell that I would just transform 45,000 desktops without blinking an eye. I like to wade into the danger zone. But like you were saying, Ben, take the pressure off.
Yeah.
So treat things more like an experiment. You know what? I get it. That's scary. That's confusing. That's, risky, whatever it might be, whatever the feeling is. Let's try something different for 3 months. Or 3 weeks, or whatever the tolerance is. So in this particular example, I had teams that were project managing from a spreadsheet, not even Microsoft Project. Project managing from a spreadsheet, nothing was getting done. There was just churn, because they were spending all their time on technical debt and bugs, and they were never getting to the actual work. And I said to them, can we try something? Oh, no, oh, we can't. I said, okay, shh, let's dial back. I will set it all up for you. You just have to show up, and let's try to do this work differently for the next 3 months.
Yeah.
And if at the end of 3 months, we still have not made any forward ground, and considering we haven't for 5 years, 3 months is not a high risk time period. At the end of 3 months, if you don't like it, you don't feel comfortable, this isn't working, the people around you are complaining, whatever the reason might be, you don't even have to give me a reason. If it just isn't for you, at the end of 3 months, I will put everything back into the spreadsheet. And we can pretend that these 3 months didn't happen and we just move on with doing it the way we used to do it. But let's try 3 months. So if we give people that little wiggle room, okay, she's going to give me an out. I'm okay with it if I can say, told you so. Or I can say, look, see, this didn't work. Then you can go, softly, as we say. You can move into the change without people feeling threatened that they're going to have to do something they really aren't prepared to do.
Yeah.
And then, kind of handle it with kid gloves. And with the public, so she mentions the union, the actual cost. Yes, I have dealt with some of the most difficult unions out there, and you have to engage them in the beginning. You cannot say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to, this is the timeline, yada, yada. And by the way, now we've told you, get on board. Because no union is ever going to get on board because they've been told a change is going to happen. They need to see that they are part of the conversation. Their objectives, and there will be many, need to be heard. But the same thing, you have to kind of do the same approach with them. Okay, we hear you, we see you, we know this is an objection. Do we all agree we need to make a change?
Yeah.
What might be different, but do we all at least agree that we have to make the change? Okay, we agree. Now, how we get there, we have to start moving. So we can keep putting up roadblocks, or we can start inching forward little by little. And in one case, it was air traffic controllers, and those unions are tightly managed. And you cannot give them anything where work might be seen as adding additional duties to an already very complicated job. So you have to be able to show that what you're doing is, yes, it's a change. It's going to require a retrain, but the end result is going to remove pressure. It's going to remove stress. It's going to remove workload. And so when you're working with your unions or your bean counters or your cost control people, you've got to show them that these changes are going to be incremental. They're going to be well managed, and that they are going to alleviate the tensions and the pressures and the stresses, not add more to the pile.
Yeah, well, that's great stuff, Indra. One last, I'm just looking at the time. We've got a minute left. One last comment and question from Stuart. Stuart says, culture always feels like such a vague concept that people struggle to formulate a response to, whereas shadow organization feels like something you can work with. Are they the same thing for practical purposes?
That's a great question and a good one to end on. So the shadow organization is part of your culture. It is not the culture. Your culture is made up a lot of things. It's made up with the company structure. It's all those formal things as well as that informal structure. But it's really about how people are working and relating and interacting and feeling safe and being seen. So your shadow organization is a big part of that. And it's certainly a part you can work on without saying, we're going to transform the entire culture of the organization, which, to Stuart's point, is a big, scary, what is that thing? So it's really about that communication, that interaction, the informal structures that are happening that all keep an organization ticking. And if you have leadership that is vulnerable, transparent, and real about what's happening, you've already started to fight some of those battles, because that divide, when it becomes a negative shadow organization, that divide happens when people don't trust the people that are supposed to be making decisions. But if they see their leaders as trustworthy and safe and willing to admit they don't have all of the answers, then you start bridging that divide. You don't have an unhealthy shadow organization. You have a healthy one. So a lot of this comes down to, you're not trying to fix the shadow organization. You're not trying to expose the shadow organization. A lot of times it's really about fixing, if we want to use the word fixing, transforming our leaders and how they lead. Yeah,
I think it's the like, I think of it as like the social operating system in the organization. And you can't, as you say, shine a light on it and make it disappear. You've got to learn to work with it in really healthy ways, and that starts with leadership and most importantly, as you said, trust and transparency. So we're just at time, or maybe slightly over, Indra. So I wanted to say a big thank you for a fantastic session. It lived up to the billing and was just as enjoyable as I'd hoped it would be. And thanks to everybody who joined and made it right the way to the end and contributed to the polls, shared your insight and asked questions in the chat throughout. That's what makes these sessions more enjoyable for Indra and I and our expert speakers, as well as more valuable for everybody that shows up. We'll be back on Friday, same time, for session 5. Looking at the value mirage and how transformation programs fall short on delivering the expected and promised and hoped for outcomes and benefits and value. So thanks everybody for taking the time to spend with us this morning. And we look forward to seeing you same time next week. Thanks again, Indra, and enjoy your Mediterranean Friday afternoon.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for joining.
Thanks so much.